Tensions between China and the U.S. and Canada could soon rise, sparking more heated diplomatic exchanges. Nearly 2 months after the arrest of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou in Vancouver, China is urging the U.S. to back off its extradition request. The CBC's Katie Simpson is here with the latest. Katie, there is some news right out of the U.S. as we're speaking on this file, right?
The Department of Justice is sending around an email statement to reporters in both Canada and the United States, and it confirms what we've been reporting, that the United States plans to follow through with its extradition request. But what's new here is that they're going to do it and meet all of the deadlines set by the U.S.-Canada extradition treaty, according to this statement. That's new because there were some questions about whether the United States would need an extension on the January 30th deadline. But this is paving the way for the U.S. to follow through on its request and formally demand the extradition of Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei. This is the start of a very long process, but it's a really important part of the entire process. This confirmation comes as we're seeing Canada try to create some new wiggle room for itself and try to sort of get out of the way of China. Of course, China has been taking out all of its frustrations on Canada. And today, the Foreign Affairs Minister seems to be suggesting that perhaps China's frustration, not perhaps, but perhaps China should be taking a look at whether or not Canada deserves to be hit by the brunt of this. Have a listen to what the Foreign Affairs Minister said today during an interview with Bloomberg.
The detention of Ms. Meng was not about a Canadian case against her. She is not accused of anything in Canada. She is neither charged nor convicted of anything in Canada. We have an extradition treaty with the United States. Canada's a rule of law country. We act and honor our international treaty commitments.
This is the first time Chrystia Freeland has really gone out of her way to say, hey, in Canada, Ms. Meng is not accused of anything. She's not facing any charges here. It's American charges. And it comes after we learned from Ambassador David McNaughton, who's the Canadian ambassador in the U.S., that Canada has expressed some frustration to the Trump administration that Canada is bearing the brunt of China's frustration, even though Canada is in this situation because of an American request. So it sort of shed some new light on how Canada is trying to create some wiggle room, perhaps, for Canada as these tensions continue to get worse.
We're hearing from Canada. We're hearing from the United States. What are we hearing from China?
China so far is standing very firm in its demand that Meng Wanzhou be released and that accusing Canada and the United States of abusing the extradition process. All of these developments, Chrystia Freeland's comments happened while it's overnight in Beijing. We had the last update we had from China was the Chinese being quite upset that reports had emerged in Canada that the Americans plan to follow through with their extradition request. And that's when we heard a Chinese spokeswoman for the Foreign Affairs Ministry say, listen, these countries, Canada and the United States, they're abusing the extradition process here, and Meng Wanzhou needs to be released immediately. It's a similar message echoed by the chairman of Huawei. Of course, Meng Wanzhou is the CFO of Huawei, but the chairman, who is in Davos for a series of high-level meetings there, told reporters off camera that he hopes this whole situation is wrapped up quickly. But now that we know the Americans have confirmed that yes, they're going to follow through with that paperwork. They're going to put it on the table, send it to Canada before or on January 30th, which is the deadline ahead of her February 6th court appearance. This process is nowhere close to being finished, and it's just sort of the very start of what could be a very lengthy legal case as well as a very lengthy diplomatic dispute.
All right. Thank you, Katie. The CBC's Katie Simpson. This diplomatic dispute, as Katie characterized it, began with the arrest of Huawei's CFO Meng Wanzhou. Here's how it developed. On December 1st, Meng Wanzhou was en route from Hong Kong to Mexico and stopped in Vancouver for a 12-hour layover. Canadian authorities arrested her on a request from the U.S. News of her arrest emerged days later. On December 6th, China demanded Canada, quote, immediately correct the mistake and release Meng. But Prime Minister Trudeau says authorities acted appropriately.
We are a country of an independent judiciary, and the appropriate authorities took the decisions in this case without any political involvement or interference.
Meng made her first court appearance on December 7th. That's when we learned she faced fraud charges for breaking U.S. sanctions on Iran. A few days later, China arrested 2 Canadians, Michael Kovrig, a former diplomat, and Michael Spavor, an entrepreneur. On December 11th, Meng was released on $10 million bail, but sentenced to house arrest while she waits for an extradition hearing. Now embroiled in a diplomatic standoff, Canada reaffirms its commitment to the rule of law.
Regardless of what goes on in other countries, Canada is and will always remain a country of the rule of law.
Since then, Trudeau has made 8 high-level calls with world leaders and top officials. Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland has made 11 calls. And those efforts have led to 11 public statements of international support denouncing China's actions. The U.S. now has just 8 days left to submit its formal request to extradite Meng, 60 days after she was arrested. The Canadian government said it expects the U.S. to meet that deadline. China says it will respond if the U.S. follows through with this extradition. What would that response look like, and will it likely involve Canada? Michael Fuchs served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs from 2013 to 2016. He's now a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Mr. Fuchs joins me from Washington. Hi there, nice to see you again. Thanks for your time.
It's great to be here.
Earlier today, Canada's ambassador to the U.S. confirmed to CBC News that the U.S. has indicated to him that they will soon file the formal extradition request for Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. How do you think China will respond?
Well, look, it's very difficult, obviously, to figure out how China is actually going to respond to this situation. I think what it does show us, though, is that the United States and Canada obviously are continuing along the path that their legal systems have set in motion here, and that they are not going to be bullied by China's retaliation against Canada and the United States for the arrest of Ms. Meng, which I think I am frankly heartened to see that the United States is going to stand up for the rules and the norms, its democratic institutions, as it should be in a case like this.
They're doing so by proceeding with the extradition request, surely, but do you think they could be doing more to stand up for that concept, i.e., we know they've had, Mike Pompeo has said something, there have been letters expressed with support for, Canada's position in this dispute, but could more be done?
Absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I think that the United States in particular should be speaking out a lot more about this issue. Now, in cases like this, especially with such sensitivities around individuals, the 2 detained Canadians, obviously, in China right now, are the priority and must be the priority for the United States as well as Canada, getting those individuals released as soon as possible. And so there may be a situation in which the United States does not, in fact, want to be shouting from the rooftops right now and trying to work this through diplomatic channels. But I do think that there is a very important role from the United States and others around the world to both publicly and privately be putting pressure on China right now and to show China that it must release the 2 imprisoned Canadians as soon as possible.
Do you think that's happening?
It's worse. The private diplomacy?
Yeah.
I think that the private diplomacy is likely happening. I think the United States regularly stands up for its citizens and the citizens, frankly, of its allies and friends around the world. And so I do think that the United States is likely making this an issue. I very much hope that they are. But there's absolutely more that can be done, and there needs to be more to be done on this case, frankly, until the 2 individuals are released.
Do you think that there's any possible way, and I know you said you're heartened to see that it appears the U.S. is proceeding with the extradition request. Do you think there's any way that they back away from it at all? And I ask only because, it appears from what we're hearing from the Chinese, from foreign spokespeople there, that, that is the one thing that they want them to do, that there might be some sort of reciprocal release of the 2 Canadians who are detained. And that hasn't been said unequivocally, I should say, but that's the insinuation. Do you think there is any way they back away, and what are the consequences more largely if they do?
Well, look, I think that there are a few things we need to keep in mind here about this case. First, we don't know all of the details about this, but what we do know publicly is that these were legal cases that the United States put into motion here, and that the United States and Canada so far have been following, again, the rule of law in their legal systems to do what they believe is in accordance, again, with their rules and norms. And that is, frankly, the thing I think that distinguishes the United States and Canada from China in a case like this, where China, in order to retaliate against the United States and Canada just going through the normal motions of their legal systems, China has retaliated by unjustly imprisoning two Canadian citizens. That just shows you right there the difference between these three countries, and how the United States and Canada are democratic countries that will follow the rule of law, and that China is exactly, frankly, the opposite. And so I think that the United States needs to continue to make sure that in whatever it does, it is going to continue to stand by its rule of the rule of law.
Our Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, gave an interview to Bloomberg today, and she said the detention of Ms. Meng was not about a Canadian case against her. She's not accused of anything in Canada. She's neither charged nor convicted of anything in Canada. We have an extradition treaty with the United States. Does that sound at all like the Canadian government is trying to alter the narrative or present, a very specific one to China? And do you think that will make any kind of difference?
Well, obviously, it's impossible for me to know what she was thinking at that moment, but I think what I would take away from her comment is that Canada is trying to stand up for the rule of law here. Again, she referenced the importance of the treaty here, and the point here is that the United States and Canada are both trying to uphold their democratic principles and the democratic institutions that make our countries, frankly, who they are, and that, and frankly, is most important in this case. The other thing that is most important here, we all need to recognize, of course, is putting a priority on getting these two Canadian citizens released as quickly as possible, and making it clear to the Chinese government that it is in their interest to release these citizens.
And that's something you did as one of the co-signers of a letter that was released yesterday with dozens of other former diplomats and scholars, in which you urged the president of China to immediately release Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spavor. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson accused you and co-signatories of interfering in China's judicial sovereignty. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that the point that I, at least, and my co-signatories were making is that this unjust detention, these unjust detentions are not in the interests of any of our countries right now. These are clearly politicized detainments and arrests. You can just see the difference, frankly, in the way in which these individuals are being treated, and the way in which Ms. Meng, who has been released on bail and is living at her home in Vancouver right now, are being treated right now. That goes to show you just how awful a situation this is for those two detained citizens. And so, again, my response is very simply that these are unjust detainments and arrests as far as the world can tell. And we are urging the Chinese government to immediately release these two citizens. And that is in the interests, frankly, of the Chinese government to do so.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fuchs. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.